Letter 2. Judging from what you tell me and from what I hear, I feel that you show great promise. You do not tear from place to place and unsettle yourself with one move after another. Restlessness of that sort is symptomatic of a sick mind. Nothing, to my way of thinking, is a better proof of a well-ordered mind than a man's ability to stop just where he is and pass some time in his own company. Be careful, however, that there is no element of discursiveness and desultoriness about this reading you refer to. This reading of many different authors and books of every description. You should be extending your stay among writers whose genius is unquestionable, deriving constant nourishment from them if you wish to gain anything from your reading that will find a lasting place in your mind. To be everywhere is to be nowhere. People who spend their whole life traveling abroad end up having plenty of places where they can find hospitality, but no real friendships. The same must needs be the case with people who never set about acquiring an intimate acquaintanceship with any one great writer, but skip from one to another, paying flying visits to them all. Food that is vomited up as soon as it is eaten is not assimilated into the body and does not do one any good. Nothing hinders a cure so much as frequent changes of treatment. A wound will not heal over if it is being made the subject of experiments with different ointments. A plant which is frequently moved never grows strong. Nothing is so useful that it can be of any service in the mere passing. A multitude of books only gets in one's way. So if you're unable to read all the books in your possession, you have enough when you have all the books you are able to read. And if you say, "But I feel like opening different books at different times," my answer will be this. Tasting one dish after another is the sign of a fussy stomach, and where the foods are dissimilar and diverse in range, they lead to contamination of the system, not nutrition. So always read well-tried authors, and if at any moment you find yourself wanting a change from a particular author, go back to ones you have read before. Each day too, acquire something which will help you to face poverty or death and other ills as well. After running over a lot of different thoughts, pick out one to be digested thoroughly that day. This is what I do myself. Out of the many bits I've been reading, I lay hold of one. My thought for today is something which I found in Epicurus. Yes, I actually make a practice of going over to the enemy's camp by way of reconnaissance, not as a deserter. A cheerful poverty, he says, is an honourable state, but if it is cheerful, it is not poverty at all. It is not the man who has too little who is poor, but the one who hankers after more. What difference does it make how much there is laid away in a man's safe or in his barns? How many head of stock he grazes, or how much capital he puts out at interest, if he is always after what is another's and only counts what he has yet to get, never what he has already? You ask what is the proper limit to a person's wealth. First, having what is essential, and second, having what is enough. Letter 8. Are you, of all people, you write, really telling me to avoid the crowd, to retire from the world and find contentment in a good conscience? Where are those Stoic rules of yours that call on a man to die in harness? Come now. Do I really give you the impression that I advocate a life of inactivity? I've only buried myself away behind closed doors in order to be able to be of use to more people. With me, no day is ever whiled away at ease. I claim a good part of my nights for study. I have no time for sleep. I just succumb to it, keeping my eyes at their work when they are heavy-lidded and exhausted from lack of rest. I have withdrawn from affairs as well as from society, and from my own affairs in particular. I'm acting on behalf of later generations. I'm writing down a few things that may be of use to them. I'm committing to writing some helpful recommendations, which might be compared to the formulae of successful medications, the effectiveness of which I have experienced in the case of my own sores, which may not have been completely cured, but have at least ceased to spread. I'm pointing out to others the right path, which I have recognized only late in life, when I'm worn out with my wanderings. Avoid, I cry, whatever is approved of by the mob, and things that are the gift of chance. Whenever circumstance brings some welcome thing your way, stop in suspicion and alarm. Wild animals and fish alike are taken in by this or that inviting prospect. Do you look on them as presents given you by fortune? They are snares. Anyone among you who wishes to lead a secure life will do his very best to steer well wide of these baited bounties, which comprise yet another instance of the errors we miserable creatures fall into. We think these things are ours, when in fact it is we who are caught. That track leads to precipices. Life on that giddy level ends in a fall. Once, moreover, prosperity begins to carry us off course. We are no more capable even of bringing the ship to a standstill than of going down with the consolation that she's been held on her course, or of going down once and for all. Fortune does not just capsize the boat, she hurls it headlong on the rocks and dashes it to pieces. Cling, therefore, to this sound and wholesome plan of life. Indulge the body just so far as suffices for good health. It needs to be treated somewhat strictly to prevent it from being disobedient to the spirit. Your food should appease your hunger, your drink quench your thirst, your clothing keep out the cold, your house be a protection against inclement weather. It makes no difference whether it is built of turf or of variegated marble imported from another country. What you have to understand is that thatch makes a person just as good a roof as gold does. Spurn everything that is added on by way of decoration and display by unnecessary labour. Reflect that nothing merits admiration except the spirit, the impressiveness of which prevents it from being impressed by anything. If these are the things I'm saying to myself, if these are the things I'm saying to future generations, don't you think I'm doing more good than when I go into court to enter into a recognizance on someone's behalf, or stamp my seal on a will, or lend my assistance by word or action in the Senate to some candidate for office? Those who appear inactive are, believe me, engaged in far more important activity. They're dealing with matters divine and human at the same moment. But the time has come to make an end, and in accordance with the practice, I've started to make some disbursement on this letter's behalf. For this I shall not draw on my own resources. I'm still turning over the pages of Epicurus, and the following saying, one I read today, comes from him. To win true freedom, you must be a slave to philosophy. A person who surrenders and subjects himself to her doesn't have his application deferred from day to day. He's emancipated on the spot, the very service of philosophy being freedom. Quite possibly, you'll be demanding to know why I'm quoting so many fine sayings from Epicurus rather than ones belonging to our own school. But why should you think of them as belonging to Epicurus and not as common property? Think how many poets say things that philosophers have said, or ought to have said, not to mention the tragedians or our native Roman drama, which has a serious element in it as well, and stands halfway between comedy and tragedy. Think of the quantity of brilliant lines to be found lying about in farces alone. Think of the number of Publilius verses that really ought to be spoken by actors, wearing the tragic buskins instead of barefooted pantomime actors. I'll quote one verse of his which belongs to philosophy, and the same facet of philosophy that I was occupied with just now. A verse in which he proclaims that gifts, which chance brings our way, are not to be regarded as possessions. If you pray a thing may, and it does come your way, 'tis a long way from being your own. I recall you're expressing the same idea a good deal more happily and succinctly. What fortune has made yours is not your own. And I can't pass over that even happier expression of yours. The boon that could be given can be withdrawn. Letter 9. You desire to know whether Epicurus is right in one of his letters in criticizing those who maintain that the wise man is content with himself and therefore needs no friend. This is what Epicurus objects to in Stilbo, and those who believe that the supreme ideal in life is a mind devoid of feeling, or as we say, impatience. We are bound to involve ourselves in ambiguity if we try to express in a single word the meaning of the Greek term apatheia by transferring it straight into our word impatientia, for it may be understood in the opposite sense to the one we wish, with people taking it to signify the man who is unable to endure anything that goes badly for him instead of what we mean by it, the man who refuses to allow anything that goes badly for him to affect him. Consider then whether it might not be preferable to call it a mind that is invulnerable or above all suffering. The difference here between the Epicurean and our own school is this. Our wise man feels his troubles but overcomes them, while their wise man does not even feel them. We share with them the belief that the wise man is content with himself. Nevertheless, self-sufficient though he is, he still desires a friend, a neighbor, a companion. Notice how self-contented he is. On occasion, such a man is content with a mere partial self. If he loses a hand as a result of war or disease, or has one of his eyes, or even both, put out in an accident, he will be satisfied with what remains of himself, and be no less pleased with his body now that it is maimed and incomplete than he was when it was whole. But while he does not hanker after what he has lost, he does prefer not to lose them. And this is what we mean when we say the wise man is self-content. He is so in the sense that he is able to do without friends, not that he desires to do without them. When I speak of his being able to do this, what I'm saying in fact amounts to this. He bears the loss of a friend with equanimity. Not that he will then be without a friend, for it is his to decide how soon he makes good the loss. Just as Phidias can carve another statue straight away if he loses one, so our wise man with his skill in the art of making friends will fill the place of someone he has lost. I suppose you will want to know how he will be able to make a friend so quickly. Well, I shall tell you, provided we agree that I may make this the moment to pay my debt and square my account so far as this letter is concerned. I shall show you, said Hecato, a love philter compounded without drug or herb or witch's spell. It is this: if you wish to be loved, love. Great pleasure is to be found not only in keeping up an old and established friendship, but also in beginning and building up a new one. There is the same difference between having gained a friend and actually gaining a friend as there is between a farmer harvesting and a farmer sowing. The philosopher Attalus used to say that it was more of a pleasure to make a friend than to have one, in the same way as an artist derives more pleasure from painting than from having completed a picture. When his whole attention is absorbed in concentration on the work he is engaged on, a tremendous sense of satisfaction is created in him by his very absorption. There is never quite the same gratification after he has lifted his hand from the finished work. From then on, what he is enjoying is the art's end product, whereas it was the art itself that he enjoyed while he was actually painting. So with our children, their growing up brings wider fruits, but their infancy was sweeter. To come back to the question, the wise man, self-sufficient as he is, still desires to have a friend if only for the purpose of practicing friendship and ensuring that those talents are not idle. Not, as Epicurus put it in the same letter, for the purpose of having someone to come and sit beside his bed when he is ill, or come to his rescue when he is hard up or thrown into chains, but so that on the contrary, he may have someone by whose sickbed he himself may sit, or whom he may himself release when that person is held prisoner by hostile hands. Anyone thinking of his own interests and seeking out friendship with this in view is making a great mistake. Things will end as they began. He has secured a friend who is going to come to his aid if captivity threatens. At the first clank of a chain, that friend will disappear. These are what are commonly called fair weather friendships. A person adopted as a friend for the sake of his usefulness will be cultivated only for so long as he is useful. This explains the crowd of friends that clusters about successful men, and the lonely atmosphere about the ruined, their friends running away when it comes to the testing point. It explains the countless scandalous instances of people deserting or betraying others out of fear for themselves. The ending inevitably matches the beginning. A person who starts being friends with you because it pays him will similarly cease to be friends because it pays him to do so. If there is anything in a particular friendship that attracts a man other than the friendship itself, the attraction of some reward or other will counterbalance that of the friendship. What is my object in making a friend? To have someone to be able to die for, someone I may follow into exile, someone for whose life I may put myself up as security and pay the price as well. The thing you describe is not friendship, but a business deal, looking to the likely consequences, with advantage as its goal. There can be no doubt that the desire lovers have for each other is not so very different from friendship. You might say it was friendship gone mad. Well then, does anyone ever fall in love with a view to a profit, or advancement, or celebrity? Actual love in itself, heedless of all other considerations, inflames people's hearts with a passion for the beautiful object, not without the hope, too, that the affection will be mutual. How then can the nobler stimulus of friendship be associated with any ignoble desire? You may say we are not at present concerned with the question whether friendship is something to be cultivated for its own sake, but this, on the contrary, is exactly what needs proving most. For if friendship is something to be sought out for its own sake, the self-contented man is entitled to pursue it. And how does he approach it? In the same way as he would any object of great beauty, not drawn by gain, not out of alarm at the vicissitudes of fortune. To procure friendship only for better and not for worse is to rob it of all its dignity. The wise man is content with himself. A lot of people, Lucilius, put quite the wrong interpretation on this statement. They remove the wise man from all contact with the world outside, shutting him up inside his own skin. We must be quite clear about the meaning of this sentence and just how much it claims to say. It applies to him so far as happiness in life is concerned. For this, all he needs is a rational and elevated spirit that treats fortune with disdain. For the actual business of living, he needs a great number of things. I should like to draw your attention to a similar distinction made by Chrysippus. The wise man, he said, lacked nothing but needed a great number of things, whereas the fool, on the other hand, needs nothing, for he does not know how to use anything, but lacks everything. The wise man needs hands and eyes and a great number of things that are required for the purposes of day-to-day life, but he lacks nothing. For lacking something implies that it is a necessity, and nothing, to the wise man, is a necessity. Self-contented as he is, then, he does need friends, and wants as many of them as possible, but not to enable him to lead a happy life. This he will have even without friends. The supreme ideal does not call for any external aids. It is homegrown, wholly self-developed. Once it starts looking outside itself for any part of itself, it is on the way to being dominated by fortune. But what sort of life, people may say, will the wise man have if he is going to be left without any friends when he is thrown into prison or stranded among foreigners, or detained in the course of a voyage in distant parts, or cast away on some desert shore? It will be like that of Jove, while nature takes her rest, of brief duration, when the universe is dissolved and the gods are all merged in one, finding repose in himself, absorbed in his own thoughts. Such is more or less the way of the wise man. He retires to his inner self, is his own company, so long in fact as he remains in a position to order his affairs according to his own judgment. He remains self-content even when he marries, even when he brings up his children. He is self-content, and yet he would refuse to live if he had to live without any human company at all. Natural promptings, not thoughts of any advantage to himself, impel him towards friendship. We are born with a sense of the pleasantness of friendship, just as of other things, in the same way as there exists in man a distaste for solitude and a craving for society, natural instinct drawing one human being to another. So too with this, there is something inherent in it that stimulates us into seeking friendships. The wise man, nevertheless, unequaled though he is in his devotion to his friends, though regarding them as being no less important and frequently more important than his own self, will still consider what is valuable in life to be something wholly confined to his inner self. He will repeat the words of Stilbo when his hometown was captured and he emerged from the general conflagration, his children lost, his wife lost, alone and nonetheless a happy man, and was questioned by Demetrius. Asked by this man, known from the destruction he dealt out to towns, as Demetrius the city sacker, whether he had lost anything, he replied, "I have all my valuables with me." There was an active and courageous man victorious over the very victory of the enemy. "I have lost," he said, "nothing." He made Demetrius wonder whether he had won a victory after all. "All my possessions," he said, "are with me," meaning by this the qualities of a just, a good, and an enlightened character, and indeed the very fact of not regarding as valuable anything that is capable of being taken away. We are impressed at the way some creatures pass right through fire without physical harm. How much more impressive is the way this man came through the burning and the bloodshed and the ruins uninjured and unscathed. Does it make you see how much easier it can be to conquer a whole people than to conquer a single man? Those words of Stilbo's are equally those of the Stoic. He too carries his valuables intact through cities burnt to ashes, for he is contented with himself. This is the line he draws as the boundary for his happiness. In case you imagine that we Stoics are the only people who produce noble sayings, let me tell you something. See that you put this down to my credit, even though I've already settled my account with you for today. Epicurus himself, who has nothing good to say for Stilbo, has uttered a statement quite like this one of Stilbo's. "Any man," he says, "who does not think that what he has is more than ample, is an unhappy man, even if he is the master of the whole world." Or if you prefer to see it expressed like this, the point being that we should be ruled not by the actual words used, but by the sense of them. A man is unhappy, though he reign the world over, if he does not consider himself supremely happy. To show you, indeed, that these are sentiments of a universal character, prompted evidently by nature herself, you will find the following verse in a comic poet: "Not happy he who thinks himself not so." What difference does it make, after all, what your position in life is if you dislike it yourself? What about so-and-so, you may ask, who became rich in such a despicable manner, or such and such, a person who gives orders to a great many people, but is at the mercy of a great many more? Supposing they say they are happy, will their own opinions to this effect make them happy? It does not make any difference what a man says. What matters is how he feels, and not how he feels on one particular day, but how he feels at all times. But you have no need to fear that so valuable a thing may fall into unworthy hands. Only the wise man is content with what is his. All foolishness suffers the burden of dissatisfaction with itself. Letter 11. I have had a conversation with your talented friend. From the very beginning of his talk with me, it was apparent what considerable gifts of character and intelligence he possesses. He gave me a foretaste of his capabilities, to which he will certainly live up. For the things he said, caught as he was quite off his guard, were entirely unrehearsed. As he was recovering his self-possession, he could scarcely get over his embarrassment, always a good sign in a young man. So deep had the blush been that suffused his face. This I rather suspect will remain with him, even when he has built up his character and stripped it of all weakness, even when he has become a wise man. For no amount of wisdom enables one to do away with physical or mental weaknesses that arise from natural causes. Anything inborn or ingrained in one can by dint of practice be allayed, but not overcome. When they face a crowd of people, some men, even ones with the stoutest of hearts, break into the sort of sweat one usually sees on persons in an overheated and exhausted state. Some men experience a trembling at the knees when they are about to speak. Some a chattering of the teeth, a stuttering tongue, or stammering lips. These are things which neither training nor experience ever eliminates. Nature just wields her power and uses the particular weakness to make even the strongest conscious of her, Torah. One of these things I well know is a blush, which has a habit of suddenly reddening the faces of men of even the most dignified demeanor. It is of course more noticeable in the young, with their hotter blood and sensitive complexions. Nevertheless, seasoned men and aging men alike are affected by it. Some men are more to be feared on the occasions when they flush than at any other time, as if in so doing they let loose all their inhibitions. Sulla was at his wildest when the blood had rushed to his visage. No features were more susceptible than Pompey's. He never failed to blush in company, and particularly at public meetings. I remember Fabianus blushing when he appeared to give evidence before the Senate, and this bashfulness looked wonderfully well on him. When this happens, it is not due to some mental infirmity, but to the unfamiliarity of some situation or other, which may not necessarily strike any alarm into inexperienced people, but does produce a reaction in them if they are thus liable through having a natural physical predisposition to it. Certain people have good, ordinary blood, and others just have an animated, lively sort of blood that comes to the face quickly. No amount of wisdom, as I said before, ever banishes these things. Otherwise, if she eradicated every weakness, wisdom would have dominion over the world of nature. One's physical makeup and the attributes that were one's lot at birth remain settled, no matter how much or how long the personality may strive after perfect adjustment. One cannot ban these things any more than one can call them up. The tokens used to portray embarrassment by professional actors, those actors who portray emotion, simulate unhappiness, and reproduce for us fear and apprehension, are a hanging of the head, a dropping of the voice, a casting down of the eyes and keeping them fixed on the ground. A blush is something they can never manage to reproduce. It is something that will neither be summoned up nor be told to stay away. Against these things, philosophy holds out no remedy and avails one nothing. They are quite independent. They come unbidden. They go unbidden. My letter calls for a conclusion. Here's one for you. One that will serve you in good stead too, which I'd like you to take to heart. We need to set our affections on some good man and keep him constantly before our eyes, so that we may live as if he were watching us and do everything as if he saw what we were doing. This, my dear Lucilius, is Epicurus's advice, and in giving it, he has given us a guardian and a moral tutor, and not without reason either. Misdeeds are greatly diminished if a witness is always standing near intending doers. The personality should be provided with someone it can revere, someone whose influence can make even its private inner life more pure. Happy the man who improves other people, not merely when he is in their presence, but even when he is in their thoughts. And happy too is the person who can so revere another as to adjust and shape his own personality in the light of recollections, even of that other. A person able to revere another thus will soon deserve to be revered himself. So choose yourself a Cato, or, if Cato seems too severe for you, a Lelius, a man whose character is not quite so strict. Choose someone whose way of life as well as words, and whose very face as mirroring the character that lies behind it, have won your approval. Be always pointing him out to yourself, either as your guardian or as your model. There is a need, in my view, for someone as a standard against which our characters can measure themselves. Without a ruler to do it against you won't make the crooked straight. Letter 16. It is clear to you, I know, Lucilius, that no one can lead a happy life, or even one that is bearable, without the pursuit of wisdom, and that the perfection of wisdom is what makes the happy life, although even the beginnings of wisdom make life bearable. Yet this conviction, clear as it is, needs to be strengthened and given deeper roots through daily reflection. Making noble resolutions is not as important as keeping the resolutions you have made already. You have to persevere and fortify your pertinacity until the will to good becomes a disposition to good. So you needn't go in for all this long-winded protestation or say any more on the subject. I'm well aware that you've made a great deal of progress. I realize the feelings that prompt you to put these things in your letter, and there is no pretense or speciousness about them. But to give you my honest opinion, at this stage, although I have great hopes of you, I do not yet feel quite confident about you, and I should like you to adopt the same attitude. You've no grounds for forming a ready, hasty belief in yourself. Carry out a searching analysis and close scrutiny of yourself in all sorts of different lights. Consider above all else whether you've advanced in philosophy or just in actual years. Philosophy is not an occupation of a popular nature, nor is it pursued for the sake of self-advertisement. Its concern is not with words, but with facts. It is not carried on with the object of passing the day in an entertaining sort of way and taking the boredom out of leisure. It molds and builds the personality, orders one's life, regulates one's conduct, shows one what one should do and what one should leave undone, sits at the helm and keeps one on the correct course as one is tossed about in perilous seas. Without it, no one can lead a life free of fear or worry. Every hour of the day, countless situations arise that call for advice. And for that advice, we have to look to philosophy. Someone may say, what help can philosophy be to me if there is such a thing as fate? What help can philosophy be if there is a deity controlling all? What help can it be if all is governed by chance? For it is impossible either to change what is already determined or to make preparations to meet what is undetermined. Either, in the first case, my planning is forestalled by a God who decrees how I am to act, or, in the second case, it is fortune that allows me no freedom to plan. Whichever of these alternatives, Lucilius, is true, even if all of them are true, we still need to practice philosophy, whether we are caught in the grasp of an inexorable law of fate, whether it is God, who as Lord of the universe has ordered all things, or whether the affairs of mankind are tossed and buffeted haphazardly by chance. It is philosophy that has the duty of protecting us. She will encourage us to submit to God with cheerfulness and to fortune with defiance. She will show you how to follow God and bear what chance may send you. But I mustn't pass on here to a discussion of the problem, what is within our control if there is a governing providence, whether we are carried along, enmeshed in a train of fated happenings, or whether we are at the mercy of the sudden and the unforeseeable. For the present, I go back to the point where I was before, to advise and urge you not to allow your spiritual enthusiasm to cool off or fall away. Keep a hold on it and put it on a firm footing, so that what is at present an enthusiasm may become a settled spiritual disposition. If I know you, you'll have been looking around from the very start of this letter to see what it's going to bring you by way of a little present. Search the letter and you'll find it. You needn't think my kindness all that remarkable. I am only being generous still with someone else's property. Why though do I call it someone else's? Whatever is well said by anyone belongs to me. Here is another saying of Epicurus: if you shape your life according to nature, you will never be poor. If according to people's opinions, you will never be rich. Nature's wants are small, while those of opinion are limitless. Imagine that you've piled up all that a veritable host of rich men ever possessed, that fortune has carried you far beyond the bounds of wealth so far as any private individual is concerned, building you a roof of gold and clothing you in royal purple, conducting you to such a height of opulence and luxury that you hide the earth with marble floors, putting you in a position not merely to own, but to walk all over treasures. Throw in sculptures, paintings, all that has been produced at tremendous pains by all the arts to satisfy extravagance. All these things will only induce in you a craving for even bigger things. Natural desires are limited. Those which spring from false opinions have nowhere to stop, for falsity has no point of termination. When a person is following a track, there is an eventual end to it somewhere, but with wandering at large, there is no limit. So give up pointless, empty journeys. And whenever you want to know whether the desire aroused in you by something you are pursuing is natural or quite unseeing, ask yourself whether it is capable of coming to rest at any point. If after going a long way, there is always something remaining farther away, be sure it is not something natural. Letter 27. So you're giving me advice, are you? You say. Have you already given yourself advice then? Have you already put yourself straight? Is that how you come to have time for reforming other people? No, I'm not so shameless as to set about treating people when I'm sick myself. I'm talking to you as if I were lying in the same hospital ward, about the illness we're both suffering from and passing on some remedies. So listen to me as if I were speaking to myself. I'm allowing you access to my inmost self, calling you in to advise me as I have things out with myself. I proclaim to my own self, count your years and you'll be ashamed to be wanting and working for exactly the same things as you wanted when you were a boy. Of this one thing, make sure against your dying day that your faults die before you do. Have done with those unsettled pleasures, which cost one dear. They do one harm after they're past and gone, not merely when they're in prospect. Even when they're over, pleasures of a depraved nature are apt to carry feelings of dissatisfaction in the same way as a criminal's anxiety doesn't end with the commission of the crime, even if it's undetected at the time. Such pleasures are insubstantial and unreliable. Even if they don't do one any harm, they're fleeting in character. Look around for some enduring good instead, and nothing answers this description except what the spirit discovers for itself within itself. A good character is the only guarantee of everlasting, carefree happiness. Even if some obstacle to this comes on the scene, its appearance is only to be compared to that of clouds, which drift in front of the sun without ever defeating its light. How soon will you be fortunate enough to attain to this happiness? Well, you haven't been dragging your steps up till now, but your pace could be increased. There's a lot of work remaining to be done, and if you want to be successful, you must devote all your waking hours and all your effort to the task personally. This is not something that admits of delegation. It is a different branch of learning which has room for deviling. There was a rich man called Calvisius Sabinus in my own lifetime, who had a freedman's brains along with a freedman's fortune. I have never seen greater vulgarity in a successful man. His memory was so bad that at one moment or another, the names of Ulysses or Achilles or Priam, characters he knew as well as we knew our early teachers, would slip his memory. No doddering butler ever went through the introductions of a mass of callers committing quite such solecisms, not announcing people's names so much as foisting names on them, as Sabinus did with the Greek and Trojan heroes. But this didn't stop him wanting to appear a well-read man, and to this end, he thought up the following shortcut. He spent an enormous amount of money on slaves, one of them to know Homer by heart, another to know Hesiod, while he assigned one apiece to each of the 9 lyric poets. That the cost was enormous is hardly surprising. Not having found what he wanted in the market, he had them made to order. After this collection of slaves had been procured for him, he began to give his dinner guests nightmares. He would have these fellows at his elbow so that he could continually be turning to them for quotations from these poets, which he might repeat to the company, and then, it happened frequently, he would break down halfway through a word. Setelius Quadratus, who regarded stupid millionaires as fair game to be sponged off, and consequently also fair game for flattery, as well as, and this goes with the other 2 things, fair game for facetiousness at their expense, suggested to him that he should keep a team of scholars to pick up the bits. On Sabinus's letting it be known that the slaves had set him back 100,000 sesterces apiece, he said, "Yes, for less than that you could have bought the same number of bookcases." Sabinus was nonetheless quite convinced that what anyone in his household knew, he knew personally. It was Setelius, again, who started urging Sabinus, a pale and skinny individual whose health was poor, to take up wrestling, when Sabinus retorted, "How can I possibly do that? It's as much as I can do to stay alive," Setelius answered, Now please, don't say that. Look how many slaves you've got in perfect physical condition. A sound mind can neither be bought nor borrowed, and if it were for sale, I doubt whether it would find a buyer, and yet unsound ones are being purchased every day. But let me pay you what I owe you and say goodbye. Poverty brought into accord with the law of nature is wealth. Epicurus is constantly saying this in one way or another, but something that can never be learnt too thoroughly can never be said too often. With some people, you only need to point to a remedy. Others need to have it rammed into them. Letter 78. I am all the more sorry to hear of the trouble you are having with constant catarrh and the spells of feverishness which go with it when it becomes protracted to the point of being chronic, because this kind of ill health is something I have experienced myself. In its early stages, I refused to let it bother me, being still young enough then to adopt a defiant attitude to sickness and put up with hardships. But eventually, I succumbed to it altogether. Reduced to a state of complete emaciation, I'd arrived at a point where the catarrhal discharges were virtually carrying me away with them altogether. On many an occasion, I felt an urge to cut my life short there and then, and was only held back by the thought of my father, who had been the kindest of fathers to me, and was then in his old age. Having in mind not how bravely I was capable of dying, but how far from bravely he was capable of bearing the loss, I commanded myself to live. There are times when even to live is an act of bravery. Let me tell you the things that provided me with consolation in those days, telling you to begin with that the thoughts which brought me this peace of mind had all the effect of medical treatment, comforting thoughts, provided they are not of a discreditable kind, contribute to a person's cure. Anything which raises his spirits benefits him physically as well. It was my Stoic studies that really saved me. For the fact that I was able to leave my bed and was restored to health, I give the credit to philosophy. I owe her, and it is the least of my obligations to her, my life. But my friends also made a considerable contribution to my return to health. I found a great deal of relief in their cheering remarks, in the hours they spent at my bedside, and in their conversations with me. There is nothing, my good Lucilius, quite like the devotion of one's friends for supporting one in illness and restoring one to health, or for dispelling one's anticipation and dread of death. I even came to feel that I could not really die when these were the people I would leave surviving me. Or perhaps I should say, I came to think I would continue to live because of them, if not among them, for it seemed to me that in death I would not be passing away, but passing on my spirit to them. These things gave me the willingness to help my own recovery and to endure all the pain. It is quite pathetic after all, if one has put the will to die behind one, to be without the will to live. There then are your remedies. The doctor will be telling you how much walking you should do, how much exercise you should take. He will be telling you not to overdo the inactivity, as is the tendency with invalids, and recommending reading aloud to exercise the breathing, its passages and reservoir being the areas affected. He will recommend that you take a trip by sea and derive some stimulation for the internal organs from the gentle motion of the boat. He will prescribe a diet for you and tell you when to make use of wine as a restorative and when to give it up in case it starts you coughing or aggravates your cough. My own advice to you, and not only in the present illness but in your whole life as well, is this: refuse to let the thought of death bother you. Nothing is grim when we have escaped that fear. There are three upsetting things about any illness: the fear of dying, the physical suffering, and the interruption of our pleasures. I have said enough about the first, but will just say this, that the fear is due to the facts of nature, not of illness. Illness has actually given many people a new lease of life. The experience of being near to death has been their preservation. You will die not because you are sick, but because you are alive. That end still awaits you when you have been cured. In getting well again, you may be escaping some ill health, but not death. Now let us go back and deal with the disadvantage which really does belong to illness. the fact that it involves considerable physical torments. These are made bearable by their intermittency, for when pain is at its most severe, the very intensity finds means of ending it. Nobody can be in acute pain and feel it for long. Nature, in her unlimited kindness to us, has so arranged things as to make pain either bearable or brief. The severest pains have their seat in the most attenuated parts of the body. Any area of slight dimensions, like a tendon or a joint, causes excruciating agony when trouble arises within its small confines. But these parts of our anatomy go numb very quickly, the pain itself giving rise to a loss of all sensation of pain, either because the life force is impaired by being held up in its natural circulation and so loses its active power, the power which enables it to give us warning of pain, or because the diseased secretions, no longer able to drain away, become self-obliterated and deprive the areas they have congested of sensation. Thus, gout in the feet or the hands, or any pain in the vertebrae or tendons, has intermittent lulls when it has dulled the area it is torturing. These are all cases in which the distress is caused by the initial twinges, and the violence of the pain disappears as time goes on, the suffering ending in a state of insensibility. The reason why pain in an eye, an ear, or a tooth is exceptionally severe is the fact that it develops in a limited area, and indeed, this applies just as much to pains in the head. Nevertheless, if its intensity goes beyond a certain point, it is turned into a state of dazed stupefaction. So there is the comforting thing about extremities of pain. If you feel it too much, you are bound to stop feeling it. What in fact makes people who are morally unenlightened upset by the experience of physical distress is their failure to acquire the habit of contentment with the spirit. They have instead been preoccupied by the body. That is why a man of noble and enlightened character separates body from spirit and has just as much to do with the former, the frail and complaining part of our nature, as is necessary, and no more, and a lot to do with the better, the divine element. But it's hard having to do without pleasures we're used to, having to give up food and go thirsty as well as hungry. Tiresome it is in the first stages of abstinence. Later, as the organs of appetite decline in strength with exhaustion, the cravings die down. Thereafter the stomach becomes fussy, unable to stand things it could never have enough of before. The desires themselves die away, and there is nothing harsh about having to do without things for which you have ceased to have any craving. Another point is that every pain leaves off altogether, or at least falls off in intensity from time to time. Moreover, one can guard against its arrival and employ drugs to forestall it just as it is coming on. For every pain, or at least every pain with a habit of regular recurrence, gives one advance warning of its coming. In illness, the suffering is always bearable so long as you refuse to be affected by the ultimate threat. So do not go out of your way to make your troubles any more tiresome than they are and burden yourself with fretting. Provided that one's thinking has not been adding anything to it, pain is a trivial sort of thing. If by contrast, you start giving yourself encouragement, saying to yourself, it's nothing or nothing much anyway, let's stick it out, it'll be over presently, then in thinking it a trivial matter, you'll be ensuring that it actually is. Everything hangs on one's thinking. The love of power, or money, or luxurious living are not the only things which are guided by popular thinking. We take our cue from people's thinking even in the way we feel pain. A man is as unhappy as he has convinced himself he is, and complaining away about one's sufferings after they are over, you know the kind of language. No one had ever been in such a bad state. The torments and hardships I endured. No one thought I would recover. The number of times I was given up for lost by the family. The number of times I was despaired of by the doctors. A man on the rack isn't torn with pain the way I was. It's something I think should be banned. Even if all this is true, it is past history. What's the good of dragging up sufferings which are over, of being unhappy now just because you were then? What is more, doesn't everyone add a good deal to his tale of hardships and deceive himself as well in the matter? Besides, there is a pleasure in having succeeded in enduring, something the actual enduring of which was very far from pleasant. When some trouble or other comes to an end, the natural thing is to be glad. There are two things, then, the recollecting of trouble in the past as well as the fear of troubles to come, that I have to root out. The first is no longer of any concern to me, and the second has yet to be so. And when a man is in the grip of difficulties, he should say, there may be pleasure in the memory of even these events one day. He should put his whole heart into the fight against them. If he gives way before them, he will lose the battle. If he exerts himself against them, he will win. What in fact most people do is pull down on their own heads what they should be holding up against. When something is in imminent danger of falling on you, the pressure of it bearing heavily on you, it will only move after you and become an even greater weight to support if you back away from it. If instead you stand your ground, willing yourself to resist, it will be forced back. Look at the amount of punishment that boxers and wrestlers take to the face and the body generally. They will put up nonetheless with any suffering in their desire for fame, and will undergo it all not merely in the course of fighting, but in preparing for their fights as well. Their training in itself constitutes suffering. Let us too overcome all things, with our reward consisting not in any wreath or garland, not in trumpet calls for silence, for the ceremonial proclamation of our name, but in moral worth, in strength of spirit, in a peace that is won forever once in any contest. Fortune has been utterly defeated. I'm suffering severe pain, you may say. Well, does it stop you suffering it if you endure it in a womanish fashion? In the same way as the enemy can do far more damage to your army if it is in full retreat, every trouble that may come our way presses harder on the one who has turned tail and is giving ground. But it's really severe, you say. Well, is courage only meant to enable us to bear up under what is not severe? Would you rather have an illness that's long drawn out or one that's short and quick? If it's a long one, it will have the odd interval, giving one opportunity for rallying, granting one a good deal of time free of it, having of necessity to pause in order to build up again. An illness that's swift and short will have one of two results, either oneself or it will be snuffed out. And what difference does it make whether I or it disappears? Either way, there's an end to the pain. Another thing which will help is to turn your mind to other thoughts, and that way, get away from your suffering. Call to mind things which you have done that have been upright or courageous. Run over in your mind the finest parts that you have played, and cast your memory over the things you have most admired. This is a time for recollecting all those individuals of exceptional courage who have triumphed over pain. The man who steadily went on reading a book while he was having varicose veins cut out. The man who never stopped smiling under torture, albeit that this angered his tormentors into trying on him every instrument of cruelty they had. If pain has been conquered by a smile, will it not be conquered by reason? And here you may mention anything you care to name. Catarrh, a fit of uninterrupted coughing so violent that it brings up parts of the internal organs, having one's very entrails seared by a fever. Thirst, having limbs wrenched in different directions with dislocation of the joints, or, worse than these, being stretched on the rack or burnt alive, or subjected to the red-hot plates and instruments designed to reopen and deepen swelling wounds. There have been men who have undergone these experiences and never uttered a groan. He needs more. He hasn't asked for mercy. He needs more. He still hasn't answered. He needs more. He has actually smiled, and not a forced smile either. Surely pain is something you will want to smile at after this. But my illness has taken me away from my duties and won't allow me to achieve anything. It is your body, not your mind as well, that is in the grip of ill health. Hence it may slow the feet of a runner and make the hands of a smith or cobbler less efficient. But if your mind is by habit of an active turn, you may still give instruction and advice. Listen and learn, inquire and remember. Besides, if you meet sickness in a sensible manner, do you really think you're achieving nothing? you will be demonstrating that even if one cannot always beat it, one can always bear an illness. There is room for heroism, I assure you, in bed as anywhere else. War and the battlefront are not the only spheres in which proof is to be had of a spirited and fearless character. A person's bravery is no less evident under the bedclothes. There is something it lies open to you to achieve, and that is making the fight with illness a good one. If its threats or importunities leave you quite unmoved, you are setting others a signal example. How much scope there would be for renown if whenever we were sick, we had an audience of spectators. Be your own spectator anyway, your own applauding audience. Pleasures, moreover, are of two kinds. The physical pleasures are the ones which illness interferes with, though it does not do away with them altogether. Indeed, if you take a true view of the matter, they are actually sharpened by illness. A man deriving greater pleasure from drinking something when he is thirsty and finding food all the more welcome through being hungry. Anything set before one after one has had to fast being greeted with a heightened appetite. But no doctor can refuse his patient those other, greater and surer pleasures, the pleasures of the mind and spirit. Anyone who follows these and genuinely knows them pays no attention whatever to all the enticements of the senses. How very unfortunate he is, people say, to be sick like that. Why? Because he isn't melting snow in his wine. Because he isn't breaking ice into a bumper goblet to keep the drink he has mixed in it chilled. Because Lucrine oysters aren't being opened before him at his table. Because there isn't any bustling of cooks about the dining room, bringing in not just the viands themselves, but the actual cooking apparatus along with them. For this is the latest innovation in luxurious living, having the kitchen accompany the dinner in to the table, so as to prevent any of the food losing its heat, and avoid anything being at a temperature insufficiently scalding for palates, which are nowadays like leather. How very unfortunate he is to be sick, they say. In fact, he'll be eating just as much as he'll digest. There won't be a whole boar lying somewhere where people can see it, conveying the impression that it's been banished from the table as being too cheap and ordinary a piece of meat to be on it. Nor will he have his trolley piled high with, now that people think it not quite nice to see the whole bird, carved breast of fowl. And what's so bad about your being deprived of that? You may be eating like a sick man, but you'll at last be eating in the way a healthy man should. But given one thing, we shall find it easy to put up with the potions and warm drinks and all the rest of it. All the things that seem unbearable to people who have become spoilt, who have become soft through a life of luxury, ailing more in the mind than they ever are in the body. The one requirement is that we cease to dread death, and so we shall as soon as we have learned to distinguish the good things and the bad things in this world. Then, and then only, shall we stop being weary of living as well as scared of dying. For a life spent viewing all the variety, the majesty, the sublimity in things around us can never succumb to ennui. The feeling that one is tired of being, of existing, is usually the result of an idle and inactive leisure. Truth will never pall on someone who explores the world of nature, wearied as a person will be by the spurious things. Moreover, even if death is on the way with a summons for him, though it come all too early, though it cut him off in the prime of life, he has experienced every reward that the very longest life can offer, having gained extensive knowledge of the world we live in, having learnt that time adds nothing to the finer things in life, whereas any life must needs seem short to people who measure it in terms of pleasures which through their empty nature are incapable of completeness. Let these reflections promote your recovery, and meanwhile do find time for our correspondence. Time will bring us together again one of these days, and when, as it will, the reunion comes, however short it may last, knowing how to make the most of it will turn it into a long one. As Posidonius said, in a single day there lies open to men of learning more than there ever does to the unenlightened in the longest of lifetimes. In the meantime, cling tooth and nail to the following rule: not to give in to adversity, never to trust prosperity, and always take full note of Fortune's habit of behaving just as she pleases, treating her as if she were actually going to do everything it is in her power to do. Whatever you have been expecting for some time comes as less of a shock. Letter 91. My friend Liberalis is in some distress at the present moment, following the news of the complete destruction of Lyons by fire. It is a disaster by which anyone might be shaken, let alone a person quite devoted to his hometown. This event has left him groping for that staunchness of spirit, which, naturally enough, he cultivated when it was a case of facing what to him were conceivable fears. One is not surprised, though, that there were never any advanced fears of such an unexpected, virtually unheard of catastrophe, considering that there was no precedent for it. Plenty of cities have suffered damage by fire, but none has ever been blotted out by one, even when its buildings have been set aflame by enemy hands. In many places, the flame's the out. And even if they are continually rekindled, they are seldom so all-consuming as to leave nothing for tools to demolish. Earthquakes, too, have hardly ever been so ruinous and violent as to raze whole towns. There has never, in fact, been a fire so destructive as to leave nothing for a future fire to consume. But here, a single night has laid low a host of architectural splendors, any one of which might have been the glory of a separate city. In the depth of peace, there has come such a blow as could not have been dreaded in war itself. Who would believe it? At a time when military conflict is in abeyance everywhere, when an international peace covers all parts of the globe, Lyons, the showpiece of Gaul, is lost to view. Fortune invariably allows those whom she strikes down in the sight of all a chance to fear what they were going to suffer. The fall of anything great generally takes time, but here, a single night is all there was between a mighty city and no city at all. It was destroyed, in fact, in less time than I have taken telling you of its destruction. Sturdy and resolute though he is when it comes to facing his own troubles, our Liberalis has been deeply shocked by the whole thing, and he has some reason to be shaken. What is quite unlooked for is more crushing in its effect, and unexpectedness adds to the weight of a disaster. The fact that it was unforeseen has never failed to intensify a person's grief. This is a reason for ensuring that nothing ever takes us by surprise. We should project our thoughts ahead of us at every turn and have in mind every possible eventuality instead of only the usual course of events. For what is there that Fortune does not, when she pleases, fell at the height of its powers? What is there that is not the more assailed and buffeted by her, the more lustrous its attraction? What is there that is troublesome or difficult for her? Her assaults do not always come along a single path, or even a well-recognized path. At one time, she will call in the aid of our own hands in attacking us. At another, she will be content with her own powers in devising for us dangers for which no one is responsible. No moment is exempt. In the midst of pleasures, there are found the springs of suffering. In the middle of peace, war rears its head, and the bulwarks of one's security are transformed into sources of alarm, friend turning foe, and ally turning enemy. The summer's calm is upset by sudden storms more severe than those of winter. In the absence of any enemy, we suffer all that an enemy might wreak on us. Overmuch prosperity, if all else fails, will hit on the instruments of its own destruction. Sickness assails those leading the most sensible lives. Tuberculosis, those with the strongest constitutions. Retribution, the utterly guiltless. Violence, the most secluded. Misfortune has a way of choosing some unprecedented means or other of impressing its power on those who might be said to have forgotten it. A single day strews in ruins all that was raised by a train of construction extending over a long span of time and involving a great number of separate works and a great deal of favour on the part of heaven. To say a day, indeed, is to put too much of a brake on the calamities that hasten down upon us. An hour, an instant of time, suffices for the overthrow of empires. It would be some relief to our condition and our frailty if all things were as slow in their perishing as they were in their coming into being. But as it is, the growth of things is a tardy process, and their undoing is a rapid matter. Nothing is durable, whether for an individual or for a society. The destinies of men and cities alike sweep onwards. Terror strikes amid the most tranquil surroundings, and without any disturbance in the background to give rise to them, calamities spring from the least expected quarter. States which stood firm through civil war, as well as war's external collapse, without a hand being raised against them. How few nations have made of their prosperity a lasting thing. This is why we need to envisage every possibility and to strengthen the spirit to deal with the things which may conceivably come about. Rehearse them in your mind. Exile, torture, war, shipwreck. Misfortune may snatch you away from your country, or your country away from you, may banish you into some wilderness. These very surroundings in which the masses suffocate may become a wilderness. All the terms of our human lot should be before our eyes. We should be anticipating not merely all that commonly happens, but all that is conceivably capable of happening if we do not want to be overwhelmed and struck numb by rare events as if they were unprecedented ones. Fortune needs envisaging in a thoroughly comprehensive way. Think how often towns in Asia or in Greece have fallen at a single earth tremor. How many villages in Syria or Macedonia have been engulfed. How often this form of disaster has wrought devastation in Cyprus. How often Paphos has tumbled about itself. Time and again we hear the news of the annihilation of a whole city. And how small a fraction of mankind are we who hear such news this often. So let us face up to the blows of circumstance and be aware that whatever happens is never as serious as rumor makes it out to be. So a city has burned, a wealthy city, and the glory of the provinces, of which it was a feature, though it stood in a class of its own, perched as it was on a single hill, and that not a hill of very great dimensions. But time will sweep away the very traces of every one of those cities, of whose splendor and magnificence you nowadays hear. Look at the way the very foundations of once famous cities of Greece have been eroded by now to the point where nothing is left to show that they ever even existed. And it is not only the works of human hands that waste away, nor only structures raised by human skill and industry that the passing days demolish. Mountain massifs crumble away. Whole regions have subsided. The waves have covered landmarks once far out of sight of the sea. The immense force of volcanic fires that once made the mountain tops glow has eaten them away and reduced to lowly stature what once were soaring peaks, reassuring beacons to the mariner. The works of nature herself suffer, so it is only right that we should bear the overthrow of cities with resignation. They stand just to fall. Such is the sum total of the end that awaits them, whether it be the blast of a subterranean explosion, throwing off the restraining weight above it, or the violence of floodwaters increasing to a prodigious degree underground, until it breaks down everything in its way, or a volcanic outburst fracturing the Earth's crust, or age, to which nothing is immune, overcoming them little by little, or plague carrying off its population and causing the deserted area to decay. It would be tedious to recount all the different ways by which fate may overtake them. One thing I know, all the works of mortal man lie under sentence of mortality. We live among things that are destined to perish. Such, then, are the comforting reflections which I would offer our liberalis, who burns with a kind of passion beyond belief for his birthplace, which it may be has only been consumed so as to be called to higher things. A setback has often cleared the way for greater prosperity. Many things have fallen only to rise to more exalted heights. That opponent of affluence in the capital, Timagenes, used to declare that the one reason fires distressed him was the knowledge that what would rise up afterwards would be of a better standard than what had burned. In the city of Lyon, too, one may presume that everyone will endeavour to make the work of restoration a greater, more noble achievement than what they have lost. May that work be of lasting duration, and may the new foundation be attended by happier auspices, with a view to its lasting for a longer, and indeed for all time. This is the 100th year since the town came into being. And even for a human being, such an age is by no means the uttermost limit. Founded by Plancus in an area of concentrated population, it owes its growth to its favourable situation. Yet how many grievous blows it has had to suffer in the time it takes for a man to grow old. So the spirit must be trained to a realization and an acceptance of its lot. It must come to see that there is nothing fortune will shrink from, that she wields the same authority over emperor and empire alike, and the same power over cities as over men. There's no ground for resentment in all this. We've entered into a world in which these are the terms life is lived on. If you're satisfied with that, submit to them. If you're not, get out, whatever way you please. Resent a thing by all means if it represents an injustice decreed against yourself personally. But if this same constraint is binding on the lowest and the highest alike, then make your peace again with destiny, the destiny that unravels all ties. There's no justification for using our graves and all the variety of monuments we see bordering the highways as a measure of our stature. In the ashes, all men are levelled. We're born unequal. We die equal. And my words apply as much to cities as to those who live in them. Ardea was taken, and so was Rome. The great lawgiver draws no distinctions between us according to our birth or the celebrity of our names, save only while we exist. On the reaching of mortality's end, he declares, away with snobbery. All that the earth carries shall forthwith be subject to one law without discrimination. When it comes to all we're required to go through, we're equals. No one is more vulnerable than the next man, and no one can be more sure of his surviving to the morrow. King Alexander of Macedon once took up the study of geometry, poor fellow, inasmuch as he would this find out how minute the earth really was. The earth of which he had possessed himself of a tiny part. Yes, poor fellow, I call him, for the reason that he was bound to discover that his title was a false one. For who can be great in an area of minute dimensions? Anyway, the points he was being instructed in were of some subtlety and such that the learning of them demanded the closest concentration, not the sort of thing that would be grasped by a crazed individual projecting his thoughts across the seas. Teach me, he said, the easy things, to which his instructor answered, these things are the same for everyone, equally difficult for all. Well, imagine that nature is saying to you, those things you grumble about are the same for everyone. I can give no one anything easier, but anyone who likes may make them easier for himself. How? By viewing them with equanimity. You must needs experience pain and hunger and thirst and grow old, assuming that you are vouchsafed a relatively long stay among men, and be ill and suffer loss and finally perish. But you needn't believe the chatter of the people around you. There's nothing in all this that's evil, insupportable, or even hard. Those people are afraid of these things by a kind of general consent. Are you going to feel alarm at death, then, in the same way as you might at some common report? What could be more foolish than a man's being afraid of people's words? My friend Demetrius has a nice way of putting things when he says, as he commonly does, that to him the utterances of the unenlightened are as noises emanating from the belly. What difference does it make to me, he asks, whether their rumblings come from their upper or their nether regions? What utter foolishness it is to be afraid that those who have a bad name can rob you of a good one. Just as the dread aroused in you by some common report has proved groundless, so too is the dread of things of which you would never be afraid if common report did not tell you to be. What harm could ever come to a good man from being besmirched by unwarranted gossip? We shouldn't even let it prejudice us against death, which itself has an evil reputation. Yet none of the people who malign it has put it to the test. Until one does, it's rather rash to condemn a thing one knows nothing about. And yet one thing you do know, and that is this: how many people it's a blessing to, how many people it frees from torture, want, maladies, suffering, weariness, and no one has power over us when death is within our own power. Letter 104. I have got away to my place at Momentum. Getting away from what? Guess. The city? No, a fever. And just as it was infiltrating my defenses too, it had already taken a hold on me, my doctor being decided in his opinion that a disturbed, irregular pulse, its natural rhythm upset, was the start of it. Whereupon, I immediately ordered my carriage out, and although my Paulina tried to hold me back, insisted on driving away, I kept saying the same thing as my mentor Gallio when he started sickening for a fever in Achaia. He immediately boarded a ship, assuring everyone that the disorder was to be put down to the place where he was living and not to his constitution. I told Paulina this. She is forever urging me to take care of my health. And indeed, as I come to realize the way her very being depends on mine, I'm beginning, in my concern for her, to feel some concern for myself. So although old age has made me better at putting up with a lot of things, here I am coming to lose this advantage of being old. The notion occurs to me that inside this old frame, there exists a young man as well, and one is always less severe on a young man. The consequence is that since I haven't managed to get her to put a little more bravery into her love for me, she has managed to induce me to show a little more love and care for myself. Concessions have to be made to legitimate emotions. There are times when, however pressing one's reasons to the contrary, one's dying breath requires to be summoned back and held back, even as it is passing one's lips, even if this amounts to torture, simply out of consideration for one's dear ones. The good man should go on living as long as he ought to, not just as long as he likes. The man who does not value his wife or a friend highly enough to stay on a little longer in life, who persists in dying in spite of them, is a thoroughly self-indulgent character. This is a duty which the soul should also impose on itself, when it is merely the convenience of near and dear ones that demands it, and not only if and when it feels the wish to die, but also if and when it has begun to carry out the wish, it should pause a while to fit in with their interests. To return to life for another's sake is a sign of a noble spirit. It is something that great men have done on a number of occasions. Yet, to give your old age greater care and attentiveness in the realization that this pleases any of the persons closest to you, or is in their interests, or would be likely to gratify them, and this in spite of the fact that the greatest reward of that period is the opportunity it gives you to adopt a relatively carefree attitude towards looking after yourself and a more adventurous manner of living, is also, to my mind, a mark of the highest possible kindness. Besides, it brings you more than a little pleasure and recompense. For can anything be sweeter than to find that you are so dear to your wife that this makes you dearer to yourself? So it comes about that my Paulina succeeds in making me responsible for anxiety of my own as well as hers on my behalf. I expect you're keen to hear what effect it had on my health, this decision of mine to leave. Well, no sooner had I left behind the oppressive atmosphere of the city and that reek of smoking cookers which pour out, along with a cloud of ashes, all the poisonous fumes they've accumulated in their interiors whenever they're started up, then I noticed the change in my condition at once. You can imagine how much stronger I felt after reaching my vineyards. I fairly waded into my food talk about animals just turned out onto spring grass. So by now, I'm quite my old self again. That feeling of listlessness, being bodily ill at ease and mentally inefficient didn't last. I'm beginning to get down to some wholehearted work. This is not something, however, to which mere surroundings are conducive, unless the mind is at its own disposal, able at will to provide its own seclusion even in crowded moments. On the contrary, the man who spends his time choosing one resort after another in a hunt for peace and quiet will, in every place he visits, find something to prevent him from relaxing. The story is told that someone complained to Socrates that traveling abroad had never done him any good, and received the reply, "What else can you expect, seeing that you always take yourself along with you when you go abroad?" What a blessing it would be for some people if they could only lose themselves. As things are, these persons are a worry and a burden, a source of demoralization and anxiety to their own selves. What good does it do you to go overseas, to move from city to city? If you really want to escape the things that harass you, what you're needing is not to be in a different place, but to be a different person. Suppose you've arrived in Athens, or suppose it's Rhodes. Choose any country you like. What difference does the character of the place make? You'll only be importing your own with you. You'll still look on wealth as a thing to be valued. Your poverty will be causing you torment, while, this being the most pathetic thing about it all, your poverty will be imaginary. However much you possess, there's someone else who has more, and you'll be fancying yourself to be short of things you need to the exact extent to which you lag behind him. Another thing that you'll regard as something to be valued is success in public life, in which case you're going to feel resentment when so-and-so is elected consul, or when so-and-so is re-elected for that matter, and be jealous whenever you see a person's name appearing too often in the honours lists. Your ambition will be running at so feverish a pitch that if anyone's ahead of you in the race, you'll see yourself as coming last. Death you'll think of as the worst of all bad things, though in fact, there's nothing bad about it at all except the thing which comes before it, the fear of it. You'll be scared stiff by illusory as well as genuine dangers, haunted by imaginary alarms. What good will it do you to have found a route past all those Argive forts and one escape right through the enemy's lines? Peace itself will supply you with new fears. If your mind has once experienced the shocks of fright, you'll no longer have any confidence even in things which are perfectly safe. Once it has acquired the habit of unthinking panic, it is incapable even of attending to its own self-preservation, for it runs away from dangers instead of taking steps to avert them, and we're far more exposed to them once our backs are turned. To lose someone you love is something you'll regard as the hardest of all blows to bear, while all the time, this will be as silly as crying, because the leaves fall from the beautiful trees that add to the charm of your home. Preserve a sense of proportion in your attitude to everything that pleases you, and make the most of them while they are at their best. At one moment, chance will carry off one of them, at another moment another, but the falling of the leaves is not difficult to bear, since they grow again, and it is no more hard to bear the loss of those whom you love and regard as brightening your existence, for even if they do not grow again, they are replaced. But their successors will never be quite the same. No, and neither will you. Every day, every hour sees a change in you, although the ravages of time are easier to see in others. In your own case, they are far less obvious, because to you, they do not show. While other people are snatched away from us, we are being filched away surreptitiously from ourselves. Are you never going to give any of these considerations any thought, and never going to apply any healing treatment to your wounds, instead of sowing the seeds of worry for yourself by hoping for this or that, or despairing of obtaining this or that other thing? If you're sensible, you'll run the two together, and never hope without an element of despair, never despair without an element of hope. What good has travel of itself ever been able to do anyone? It has never acted as a check on pleasure or a restraining influence on desires. It has never controlled the temper of an angry man or quelled the reckless impulses of a lover. Never, in fact, has it rid the personality of a fault. It has not granted us the gift of judgment. It has not put an end to mistaken attitudes. All it has ever done is distract us for a little while, through the novelty of our surroundings, like children fascinated by something they haven't come across before. The instability, moreover, of a mind which is seriously unwell is aggravated by it, the motion itself increasing the fitfulness and restlessness. This explains why people, after setting out for a place with the greatest of enthusiasm, are often more enthusiastic about getting away from it. Like migrant birds, they fly on, away even quicker than they came. Travel will give you a knowledge of other countries. It will show you mountains whose outlines are quite new to you, stretches of unfamiliar plains, valleys watered by perennial streams. It will allow you to observe the unique features of this or that river, the way in which, for example, the Nile rises in summer flood, or the Tigris vanishes from sight, and at the completion of its journey through hidden subterranean regions is restored to view with its volume undiminished, or the way the meander, theme of every poet's early training exercises, winds about, loop after loop, and again is carried close to its own bed, and then once more diverted into a different course before it can flow into its own stream. But travel won't make a better or saner man of you. For this we must spend time in study and in the writings of wise men to learn the truths that have emerged from their researches and carry on the search ourselves for the answers that have not yet been discovered. This is the way to liberate the spirit that still needs to be rescued from its miserable state of slavery. So long, in fact, as you remain in ignorance of what to aim at and what to avoid, what is essential and what is superfluous, what is upright or honorable conduct and what is not, it will not be traveling, but drifting. All this hurrying from place to place won't bring you any relief, for you're traveling in the company of your own emotions, followed by your troubles all the way. If only they were really following you, they'd be farther away from you. As it is, they're not at your back, but on it. That's why they weigh you down with just the same uncomfortable chafing wherever you are. It's medicine, not a particular part of the world that a person needs if he's ill. Suppose someone has broken his leg or dislocated a joint. He doesn't get into a carriage or board a ship. He calls in a doctor to have the fracture set or the dislocation reduced. Well then, when a person's spirit is wrenched or broken at so many points, do you imagine that it can be put right by a change of scenery? That sort of trouble isn't so serious that it can't be cured by an outing? Traveling doesn't make a man a doctor or a public speaker. There isn't a single art which is acquired merely by being in one place rather one another. Can wisdom then, the greatest art of all, be picked up in the course of taking a trip? Take my word for it, the trip doesn't exist that can set you beyond the reach of cravings, fits of temper, or fears. If it did, the human race would be off there in a body. So long as you carry the sources of your troubles about with you, those troubles will continue to harass and plague you, wherever you wander on land or on sea. Does it surprise you that running away doesn't do you any good? The things you're running away from are with you all the time. What you must do then is mend your ways and get rid of the burden you're carrying. Keep your cravings within safe limits. Scour every trace of evil from your personality. If you want to enjoy your travel, you must make your traveling companion a healthy one. So long as you associate with a person who's mean and grasping, you will remain a money-minded individual yourself. So long as you keep arrogant company, just so long will conceit stick to you. Cruelty, you'll never say goodbye to while you share the same roof with a torturer. Familiarity with adulterers will only inflame your desires. If you wish to be stripped of your vices, you must get right away from the examples others set of them. The miser, the swindler, the bully, the cheat, who would do you a lot of harm by simply being near you, are actually inside you. Move to better company. Live with the Catos, with Laelius, with Tubero. If you like Greek company too, attach yourself to Socrates and Zeno. The one would teach you how to, the should it be forced upon you. The other, how to the before it is forced upon you. Live with Chrysippus, live with Posidonius. They will give you a knowledge of man and the universe. They will tell you to be a practical philosopher, not just to entertain your listeners to a clever display of language, but to steel your spirit and brace it against whatever threatens. For the only safe harbour in this life's tossing, troubled sea is to refuse to be bothered about what the future will bring, and to stand ready and confident, squaring the breast to take without skulking or flinching whatever fortune hurls at us. When she created us, nature endowed us with noble aspirations, and just as she gave certain animals ferocity, others timidity, others cunning, so to us she gave a spirit of exalted ambition, a spirit that takes us in search of a life of not the greatest safety, but the greatest honor. A spirit very like the universe, which, so far as mortal footsteps may, it follows and adopts as a model. It is self-assertive. It feels assured of honor and respect. It is master of all things. It is above all things. It should accordingly give in to nothing. In nothing should it see a burden calculated to bow the shoulders of a man. Shapes frightening to the sight, hardship and death are not so at all if one can break through the surrounding darkness and look directly at them. Many other things that have caused terror during the night and been turned into matters of laughter with the coming of daylight. Shapes frightening to the sight, hardship and death. Our Virgil perfectly rightly says that they are frightening, not in reality, but to the sight. In other words, that they seem so, but in fact are not. Just what is there about them that is as terrifying as legend would have us believe? Why, Lucilius, I ask you, why should any real man be afraid of hardship? Or any human being be afraid of death? I constantly meet people who think that what they themselves can't do can't be done, who say that to bear up under the things we Stoics speak of is beyond the capacity of human nature. How much more highly I rate these people's abilities than they do themselves. I say that they are just as capable as others of doing these things, but won't. In any event, what person actually trying them has found them proved beyond him? Who hasn't noticed how much easier they are in the actual doing? It's not because they're hard that we lose confidence. They're hard because we lack the confidence. If you still need an example, take Socrates, an old man who had known his full share of suffering, who had taken every blow life could inflict, and still remained unbeaten either by poverty, a burden for him aggravated by domestic worries, or by constant hardships, including those endured on military service, apart from what he had to contend with at home, whether one thinks of his wife with her shrewish ways and nagging tongue, or his intractable children, more like their mother than their father. His whole life was lived either in wartime, or under tyranny, or under a democracy that outdid even wars and tyrants in its cruelties. The war went on for 27 years. After the fighting was ended, the state was handed over to the mercy of the 30 tyrants, a considerable number of whom were hostile to him. The final blow was his conviction and sentence on the most serious of charges. He was accused of blasphemy and of corrupting the younger generation, whom, it was alleged, he turned into rebels against God, their fathers, and the state. After that came the prison and the poison, and so little effect did all this have on Socrates' spirit. It did not even affect the expression on his face. What a rare and wonderful story of achievement. To the very last, no one ever saw Socrates in any particular mood of gaiety or depression. Through all the ups and downs of fortune, his was a level temperament. Would you like another example? Take the modern one of Marcus Cato, with whom fortune dealt in an even more belligerent and unremitting fashion. At every point she stood in his way, even at the end, at his death. Yet he demonstrated that a brave man can live in defiance of fortune, and can the in defiance of fortune. The whole of his life was passed either in civil war or in conditions of developing civil conflict. And of him, no less than of Socrates, it is possible to say that he carried himself clear of slavery, unless perhaps you take the view that Pompey, Caesar and Crassus were friends of freedom. When his country was in a state of constant change, no one ever saw a change in Cato. In every situation he was placed in, he showed himself always the same man, whether in office as praetor, in defeat at the polls, under attack in court as governor in his province, on the public platform, in the field, or in death itself. In that moment, too, of panic for the Republic, when Caesar stood on the one side, backed by 10 legions of the finest fighting men, and the entire resources and support of foreign countries as well, and on the other stood Pompey, by himself a match for all comers. And when people were moving to join either the one or the other, Cato, all on his own, established something of a party pledged to fight for the Republic. If you try to picture the period to yourself, you will see on the one side the populace, the mob all agog for revolution. On the other, the time-honoured elect of Rome, the aristocracy and knighthood. And two forlorn figures, Cato and republicanism, between them. You will find it an impressive sight, I can assure you, as you watch. The son of Atreus and King Priam with Achilles wroth with both. For there is Cato denouncing each of them, trying to disarm the pair of them, and the way he casts his vote between them is, if Caesar wins, I kill myself. If Pompey, I go into exile. What had a man to fear who, win or lose, had dictated to himself such a choice of fates as might have been decreed him by an utterly exasperated enemy? And that is how he came to die, carrying out his own self-sentence. You will see, too, the capacity of man for hardship. On foot, at the head of his troops, he crossed the deserts of North Africa. You see that thirst can be endured as well. Always in armour, trailing over a sun-baked plateau, the remnants of a beaten army, an army without supplies. He was invariably the last to drink whenever they came upon water. You see that a man can think equally little of either the distinction of office or the stigma of rejection. On the day of his election defeat, he played fives at the place of polling. You see that men can defy the might of their superiors, for with no one daring offend either Caesar or Pompey except to curry favour with the other, Cato challenged the pair of them simultaneously. You see that a man can think as little of death as of exile. He condemned himself to both, and war in the meantime. We, then, can show as spirited an attitude to just the same things, if we will only choose to slip the yoke from our necks. But first, we have to reject the life of pleasures. They make us soft and womanish. They are insistent in their demands. And what is more, require us to make insistent demands on fortune. And then we need to look down on wealth, which is the wage of slavery. Gold and silver and everything else that clutters our prosperous homes should be discarded. Freedom cannot be won without sacrifice. If you set a high value on her, everything else must be valued at little. Letter 107, Tro. Where's that moral insight of yours? Where's that acuteness of perception or magnanimity? Does something as trivial as that upset you? Your slaves have seen your absorption in business as their chance to run away. So be it. You have been let down by friends. For by all means, let them keep the name we mistakenly bestowed on them, and be called such, just to heighten their disgrace. But the fact is that your affairs have been freed for good, and all of a number of people on whom all your trouble was being wasted, and who considered you insufferable to anyone but yourself. There's nothing unusual or surprising about it all. To be put out by this sort of thing is as ridiculous as grumbling about being spattered in the street or getting dirty where it's muddy. One has to accept life on the same terms as the public baths, or crowds, or travel. Things will get thrown at you and things will hit you. Life's no soft affair. It's a long road you've started on. You can't but expect to have slips and knocks and falls and get tired and openly wish a lie for death. At one place, you will part from a companion. At another, bury one, and be afraid of one at another. These are the kind of things you'll come up against all along this rugged journey. Wanting to die? Let the personality be made ready to face everything. Let it be made to realize that it has come to terrain on which thunder and lightning play. Terrain on which grief and vengeful care have set their couch, and pallid sickness dwells, and drear old age. This is the company in which you must live out your days. Escape them you cannot, scorn them you can, and scorn them you will, if by constant reflection you have anticipated future happenings. Everyone faces up more bravely to a thing for which he has long prepared himself, sufferings even, being withstood if they have been trained for in advance. Those who are unprepared, on the other hand, are panic-stricken by the most insignificant happenings. We must see to it that nothing takes us by surprise. And since it is invariably unfamiliarity that makes a thing more formidable than it really is, This habit of continual reflection will ensure that no form of adversity finds you a complete beginner. I've been deserted by my slaves. Others have been plundered, incriminated, set upon, betrayed, beaten up, attacked with poison or with calumny. Mention anything you like. It has happened to plenty of people. A vast variety of missiles are launched with us as their target. Some are planted in our flesh already. Some are hurtling towards us at this very moment. Others merely grazing us in passing on their way to other targets. Let's not be taken aback by any of the things we're born to. Things no one need complain at for the simple reason that they're the same for everybody. Yes, the same for everybody. For even if a man does escape something, it was a thing which he might have suffered. The fairness of a law does not consist in its effect being actually felt by all alike, but in its having been laid down for all alike. Let's get this sense of justice firmly into our heads and pay up without grumbling the taxes arising from our mortal state. Winter brings in the cold, and we have to shiver. Summer brings back the heat, and we have to swelter. Bad weather tries the health, and we have to be ill. Somewhere or other, we are going to have encounters with wild beasts, and with man too, more dangerous than all those beasts. Floods will rob us of one thing, fire of another. These are conditions of our existence which we cannot change. What we can do is adopt a noble spirit, such a spirit as befits a good man, so that we may bear up bravely under all that fortune sends us and bring our wills into tune with nature's. Reversals, after all, are the means by which nature regulates this visible realm of hers. Clear skies follow cloudy. After the calm comes the storm. The winds take turns to blow. Day succeeds night. While part of the heavens is in the ascendant, another is sinking. It is by means of opposites that eternity endures. This is the law to which our minds are needing to be reconciled. This is the law they should be following and obeying. They should assume that whatever happens was bound to happen and refrain from railing at nature. One can do nothing better than endure what cannot be cured and attend uncomplainingly the God at whose instance all things come about. It is a poor soldier that follows his commander grumbling. So let us receive our orders readily and cheerfully, and not desert the ranks along the march of this glorious fabric of creation in which everything we shall suffer is a strand. And let us address Jupiter, whose guiding hand directs this mighty work, in the way our own Cleanthes did, in some most expressive lines, which I may perhaps be pardoned for translating, in view of the example set here by that master of expressiveness, Cicero. If you like them, so much the better. If not, you will at least know that I was following Cicero's example. Lead me, master of the soaring vault of heaven. Lead me, Father, where you will. I stand here prompt and eager to obey, and even suppose I were unwilling, still I should attend you and no suffering, dishonorably and grumbling, when I might have done so and been good as well. For fate, the willing leads, the unwilling drags along. Let us speak and live like that. Let fate find us ready and eager. Here is your noble spirit, the one which has put itself in the hands of fate. On the other side, we have the puny, degenerate spirit which struggles and which sees nothing right in the way the universe is ordered and would rather reform the gods than reform itself. Letter 127. The daylight has begun to diminish. It has contracted considerably, but not so much that there is not a generous amount remaining still for anyone who will, so to speak, rise with the daylight itself. More active and commendable still is the person who is waiting for the daylight and intercepts the first rays of the sun. Shame on him who lies in bed dozing when the sun is high in the sky, whose waking hours commence in the middle of the day, and even this time, for a lot of people, is the equivalent of the small hours. There are some who invert the functions of day and night and do not separate eyelids leaden with the previous day's carousal before night sets in. Their way of life, if not their geographical situation, resembles the state of those peoples whom nature, as Virgil says, has planted beneath our feet on the opposite side of the world. And when dawn's panting steeds first breathe on us, for them the reddening evening starts at length to light their lamps. There are some antipodes living in the same city as ourselves, who, as Marcus Cato said, have never seen the sun rise or set. Can you imagine that these people know how one ought to live when they do not know when one ought to live? Can they really be afraid of death like other people when this is what they have retreated into in their own lifetimes? They are as weird as birds that fly by night. They may while away their hours of darkness to a background of wine and perfume. They may occupy the whole of the time they spend, contrarily, awake eating sumptuous dishes. Individually cooked too, in a long succession of different courses. But what in fact they are doing is not banqueting, but celebrating their own last rites. At least the dead have their memorial ceremonies during the daytime. Heavens though, no day is a long one for a man who is up and about. Let us expand our life. Action is its theme and duty. The night should be kept within bounds, and a proportion of it transferred to the day. Poultry that are being reared for the table are cooped up in the dark so as to prevent them moving about and make them fatten easily. There they languish, getting no exercise, with the swelling taking possession of their sluggish bodies and the inert fat creeping over them in their magnificent seclusion. And the bodies of these people who have dedicated themselves to the dark have an unsightly look about them too, inasmuch as their complexions are unhealthier looking than those of persons who are pale through sickness, frail and feeble with their blanched appearance. In their case, the flesh on the living person is death-like, and yet I should describe this as the least of their ills. How much deeper is the darkness in their souls? Their souls are dazed and befogged, envious of the blind. What man was ever given eyes for the sake of the dark? Do you ask how the soul comes to have this perverse aversion to daylight and transference of its whole life to the nighttime? All vices are at odds with nature. All abandon the proper order of things. The whole object of luxurious living is the delight it takes in irregular ways, and in not merely departing from the correct course, but going to the farthest point away from it, and in eventually even taking a stand diametrically opposed to it. Don't you think it's living unnaturally to drink without having eaten, taking liquor into an empty system, and going on to dinner in a drunken state? Yet this is a failing which is common among young people, who cultivate their capacities to the point of drinking. Swilling would be a better description of it, in naked groups, the moment they're inside the doors of the public bathhouse, every now and then having a rub all over to get rid of the perspiration brought on by continually putting down the piping hot liquor. To them, drinking after lunch or dinner is a common habit, something only done by rural worthies and people who don't know where the true pleasure lies. The wine that gives a person undiluted enjoyment, they say, is the wine that makes its way into his system unobstructed instead of swimming about in his food. Intoxication on an empty stomach is the kind that gratifies a man. Don't you think it's living unnaturally to exchange one's clothes for women's? Is it not living unnaturally to aim at imparting the bloom of youth to a different period of life? Can there be a sorrier or crueler practice than that whereby a boy is never, apparently, allowed to grow up into a man, in order that he may endure a man's attentions for as long as may be? Won't even his years rescue him from the indignity his sex ought to have precluded? Is it not living unnaturally to hanker after roses during the winter, and to force lilies in midwinter by taking the requisite steps to change their environment and keeping up the temperature with hot water heating? Is it not living unnaturally to plant orchards on the top of towers, or to have a forest of trees waving in the wind on the roofs and ridges of one's mansions, their roots springing at a height which it would have been presumptuous for their crests to reach? Is it not living unnaturally to sink the foundations of hot baths in the sea, and consider that one is not swimming in a refined fashion unless one's heated waters are exposed to the waves and storms? Having started to make a practice of desiring everything contrary to nature's habit, they finally end up by breaking off relations with her altogether. It's daylight, time for bed, all's quiet. Now for our exercises, now for a drive, now for a meal. The daylight's getting nearer, time we had our dinner. No need to do as the crowd does. To follow the common, well-worn path in life is a sordid way to behave. Let's leave the daytime to the generality of people. Let's have early hours that are exclusively our own. This sort of person is to me as good as dead. After all, how far can a person be from the grave? And an untimely one at that, if he lives by the light of tapers and torches. I can recall a great many people who led this kind of life at one time, with a former praetor among them too, Aeschylus Buta, the man who had squandered an enormous fortune which he had inherited, and when he confessed his impoverished state to the Emperor Tiberius, was met with the remark, "You have woken up rather late." Montanus Julius, a tolerably good poet, noted for his closeness to Tiberius and subsequent fall from favour, who used to give public readings of his verse, took great delight in working sunrises and sunsets into his compositions. Hence the remark of Nata Pinarius, when someone was expressing disgust at the way Montanus' reading had continued for a whole day, and declaring that his readings weren't worth attending, I'm quite prepared to listen to him. Can I say fairer than this? From sunrise to sunset. When Montanus had just read the lines, the sun god starts his fiery flames to extend, the rosy dawn to diffuse her light, and now that plaintive bird, the swallow, starts to thrust her morsels down the throats of nestlings shrill, with gentle bills supplying each its share. With journeys yet to come, one Varus called out, and Buta starts to sleep. Varus was a Roman knight, a friend of Marcus Vinicius, who was always in attendance at good dinners, for which he used to qualify by the sauciness of his tongue. It was he too who said a little later on when Montanus had read, "The herdsmen now in byres have stalled their beasts, and night now starts to bring the drowsy world a dreamy stillness. What's that you say? Night is it now? I'll go and pay a morning call on Buta." Buta's upside-down way of life was a byword, and yet, as I've said, at one time, this sort of life was led by a great many people. The reason why some people live in this sort of way is not that they think that night in itself has any special attraction, but that they get no pleasure out of anything which is usual, apart from the fact that daylight is anathema to a bad conscience. A person who experiences a craving or a contempt for things in proportion to their costliness or cheapness looks down his nose at a form of illumination which does not cost him anything. Moreover, the man who lives extravagantly wants his manner of living to be on everybody's lips as long as he is alive. He thinks he is wasting his time if he is not being talked about. So every now and then, he does something calculated to set people talking. Plenty of people squander fortunes. Plenty of people keep mistresses. To win any reputation in this sort of company, you need to go in for something not just extravagant, but really out of the ordinary. In a society as hectic as this one, it takes more than common profligacy to get oneself talked about. I once heard that delightful storyteller, Albinovanus Pedo, describing how he had lived above Sextus Papinius. Papinius was one of the daylight-shy fraternity. About 9 o'clock at night, I'd hear the sound of whips. "What's he doing?" I'd ask, and be told he was inspecting the household accounts. About 12, I'd hear some strenuous shouting. "What's that?" I'd ask, and be told he was doing his voice exercises. About 2, I'd ask what the noise of wheels meant, and be told he was off for his drive. About daybreak, there would be a scurrying in all directions, a shouting for boys, and a chaos of activity among stewards and kitchen staff. "What is it?" I'd ask, to be told he was out of his bath and had called for his pre-dinner appetizer. His dinner then, it might be said, exceeded the capacity of his day. Far from it, for he lived in a highly economical fashion. All he used to burn up was the night. Hence Pedo's remark when some people were describing Papinius as being mean and grasping. I take it you would describe him as being an artificial light addict as well. You needn't be surprised to discover so much individuality where the vices are concerned. Vices are manifold, take countless different forms, and are incapable of classification. Devotion to what is right is simple. Devotion to what is wrong is complex and admits of infinite variations. It is the same with people's characters. In those who follow nature, they are straightforward and uncomplicated, and differ only in minor degree, while those that are warped are hopelessly at odds with the rest and equally at odds with themselves. But the chief cause of this disease, in my opinion, is an attitude of disdain for a normal existence. These people seek to set themselves apart from the rest of the world, even in the manner in which they organize their timetable, in just the same way as they mark themselves off from others by the way they dress, by the stylishness of their entertaining and the elegance of their carriages. People who regard notoriety as a reward for misbehavior have no inclination for common forms of misbehavior, and notoriety is the aim of all these people who live, so to speak, back to front. We therefore, Lucilius, should keep to the path which nature has mapped out for us and never diverge from it. For those who follow nature, everything is easy and straightforward, whereas for those who fight against her life is just like rowing against the stream. Letter 128. I've reached my house at Alba at last, late at night and worn out by the journey, which wasn't so much long as thoroughly uncomfortable, to find nothing ready for my arrival, apart from myself. So I'm in bed, recovering from my fatigue and making the best of this slowness on the part of the cook and the baker by carrying on a conversation with myself on this very theme of how nothing is burdensome if taken lightly, and how nothing need arouse one's irritation so long as one doesn't make it bigger than it is by getting irritated. My baker may be out of bread, but the farm manager will have some, or the steward, or a tenant. Bad bread, yes, you'll say. Wait then, it will soon turn into good bread. Hunger will make you find even that bread soft and wheaty. One shouldn't, accordingly, eat until hunger demands. I shall wait then, and not eat until I either start getting good bread again or cease to be fussy about bad bread. It is essential to make oneself used to putting up with a little. Even the wealthy and the well-provided are continually met and frustrated by difficult times and situations. It is in no man's power to have whatever he wants, but he has it in his power not to wish for what he hasn't got, and cheerfully make the most of the things that do come his way. And a stomach firmly under control, one that will put up with hard usage, marks a considerable step towards independence. I'm deriving immeasurable satisfaction from the way my tiredness is becoming reconciled to itself. I'm not asking for masseurs or a hot bath or any remedy except time. What was brought on by exertion rest is taking away, and whatever kind of meal is on the way is going to be an inaugural banquet for enjoyment. I have, in fact, put my spirit to a sort of test, and a surprise one too, such a test being a good deal more candid and revealing. When the spirit has prepared itself beforehand, has called on itself in advance to show endurance, it is not so clear just how much real strength it possesses. The surest indications are the ones it gives on the spur of the moment, when it views annoyances in a manner not merely unruffled, but serene, when it refrains from flying into a fit of temper or picking a quarrel with someone, when it sees to everything it requires by refraining from hankering after this and that, reflecting that one of its habits may miss a thing, but its own real self need never do so. Until we have begun to go without them, we fail to realize how unnecessary many things are. We've been using them not because we needed them, but because we had them. Look at the number of things we buy because others have bought them, or because they're in most people's houses. One of the causes of the troubles that beset us is the way our lives are guided by the example of others. Instead of being set to rights by reason, we're seduced by convention. There are things that we shouldn't wish to imitate if they were done by only a few, but when a lot of people have started doing them, we follow along, as though a practice became more respectable by becoming more common. Once they have become general, mistaken ways acquire in our minds the status of correct ones. Nobody travels now without a troop of Numidian horsemen riding ahead of him and a host of runners preceding his carriage. One feels ashamed not to have men with one to hustle oncoming travelers off the road and to show there's a gentleman coming by the cloud of dust they raise. Everybody nowadays has mules to carry his crystalware, his marine vessels, and the other articles engraved by the hands of master craftsmen. One is ashamed to be seen to have only the kind of baggage which can be jolted around without coming to any harm. Everyone's pages ride along with their faces smeared with cream, in case the sun or the cold should spoil their delicate complexions. One is ashamed if there is no member of one's retinue of boys whose healthy cheeks call for protection with cosmetics. With all such people, you should avoid associating. These are the people who pass on vices, transmitting them from one character to another. One used to think that the type of person who spreads tales was as bad as any, but there are persons who spread vices, and association with them does a lot of damage. For even if its success is not immediate, it leaves a seed in the mind, and even after we've said goodbye to them, the evil follows us, to rear its head at some time or other in the future. In the same way as people who've been to a concert carry about with them the melody and haunting quality of pieces they've just heard, interfering with their thinking and preventing them from concentrating on anything serious. So the talk of snobs and parasites sticks in our ears long after we've heard it. And it's far from easy to eradicate these haunting notes from the memory. They stay with us, lasting on and on, coming back to us every so often. This is why we must shut our ears against mischievous talk, and as soon as it starts too. Once such talk has made its entry and been allowed inside, it becomes a good deal bolder. Eventually, it reaches the stage where it says that a virtue and philosophy and justice are just a lot of claptrap. There's only one way to be happy, and that's to make the most of life. Eating, drinking, spending the money that's been left to you, that's what I call living. And that's what I call not forgetting that you've got to die someday too. The days are slipping by, and life is running out on us, never to be restored. Why should we hesitate? What's the point of being wise? Our years won't always allow us a life of pleasure. And in the meantime, while they're capable of it and clamoring for it, what's the point of thrusting austerity on them? Steal a march on death by disposing here and now of whatever he is going to take away. Look at you. No mistress, no boy to make your mistress jealous. Every day you go out sober. You eat as if you had to submit a daily account book to your father for approval. That's not living. That's merely being a part of the life enjoyed by other people. And what madness it is to deny yourself everything and so build up a fortune for your heir. A policy which has the effect of actually turning a friend into an enemy through the very amount that you're going to leave him. For the more he's going to get, the more gleeful he's going to be at your death. As for those sour and disapproving characters, those critics of other people's lives, and spoilers of their own, who set themselves up as moral tutors to society at large, you needn't give tuppence for them. You needn't ever have any hesitation when it comes to putting good living before a good reputation. These are voices you must steer clear of, like those which Ulysses refused to sail past until he was lashed to the mast. They have the same power. They lure men away from country, parents, friends, and moral values, creating expectations in them only to make sport out of the wretchedness of lives of degradation. How much better to pursue a straight course and eventually reach that destination, where the things that are pleasant and the things that are honorable finally become for you the same. And we can achieve this if we realize that there are two classes of things attracting or repelling us. We are attracted by wealth, pleasures, good looks, political advancement, and various other welcoming and enticing prospects. We are repelled by exertion, death, pain, disgrace, and limited means. It follows that we need to train ourselves not to crave for the former and not to be afraid of the latter. Let us fight the battle the other way round. Retreat from the things that attract us and rouse ourselves to meet the things that actually attack us. You know the difference, Lucilius, between the postures people adopt in climbing up and descending a mountain. Those coming down a slope lean back, those moving steeply upwards lean forward. For to tilt one's weight ahead of one when descending, and backwards when ascending, is to be in league with what one has to contend with. The path that leads to pleasures is the downward one. The upward climb is the one that takes us to rugged and difficult ground. Here, let us throw our bodies forward, in the other direction rein them back. Are you now supposing that the only people I consider a danger to our ears are the ones who glorify pleasure and inculcate in us a dread, itself a fearsome thing, of pain? No, I think we're also damaged by the people who urge us under colour of Stoic beliefs to do what's wrong. They make much of our principle that only a man of wisdom and experience can really love. He's the one man with a natural gift for the art of lovemaking then, they say, and he's equally in the best position to know all about drink and parties. Well, here's a question for discussion. Up to what age is it proper to love young men? This sort of thing may be all right for the Greeks, but the kind of talk to which we would be better to turn our ears is this. No man's good by accident. Virtue has to be learnt. Pleasure is a poor and petty thing. No value should be set on it. It's something we share with dumb animals. The minutest, most insignificant creatures scutter after it. Glory's an empty, changeable thing, as fickle as the weather. Poverty's no evil to anyone unless he kicks against it. Death is not an evil. What is it then? The one law mankind has that is free of all discrimination. Superstition is an idiotic heresy. It fears those it should love. It dishonours those it worships. For what difference does it make whether you deny the gods or bring them into disrepute? These are things which should be learnt, and not just learnt, but learnt by heart. Philosophy has no business to supply vice with excuses. A sick man who is encouraged to live in a reckless manner by his doctor has not a hope of getting well.